Hey, Dog Nation, I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and we are go for two in 22. Excited about a big event taking place. It was get ready for the kickoff to go for two in 2022 season. Obviously going to be at Marlowe's Tavern here in a couple of Wednesdays. Just rolling through a huge next few weeks here around Dog Nation. We are so excited about all of that. And really excited about this week in particular. It's Thanksgiving week, so we know family and friends are a big part of this, but it's also a chance to be back in Athens on Saturday for the regular season finale, a chance to kick around Georgia Tech and clean old-fashioned hate, the in-state rivalry game there on Saturday. So we have got so much to do. But on today's show, it's a look back, primarily what happened last Saturday against Kentucky, and also the craziness that kind of took place around the SEC and around Georgia when it comes to would-be contenders for the college football playoff. Boom. Who fall flat on their face, and they are no more. Looking at you, Tennessee, there on that. Of course, other playoff hopefuls didn't exactly have the best showing on Saturday either. So I think in light of all of that, there are two things that we learned. And we're going to kind of get into what those two things are on today's show. John Stinchcomb going to be a part of this broadcast with us there as well. And we're going to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to kind of break this into two parts. One thing we're going to do early in the show, one thing we're going to kind of do late in the show as it relates to probably the most talked about moment from the game on Saturday. And if you want to go to the DawgNation YouTube page and watch the Kirby Smart press conference, you can say this in entirety, a little bit of a back and forth that Kirby had with some reporters on this. The decision to go for it on fourth down when the game was 16-0 doesn't work. Was it a good decision? Was it not? There was some sparring over that. So we're going to kind of get into a couple of different angles on this. We'll sort of break that up and do that within a couple of different times in today's show. So we're busy. We're ready to go. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Well, if you heard me last week, you probably heard me say a few times that I had a little bit of anxiety about, speaking as a Georgia fan here, about going into Lexington, Kentucky. Boy, easy. That's not so easy to say. Lexington, Kentucky, going up to Lexington on Saturday, kind of felt like one of those games that might be a little bit of a tricky spot for Georgia. Maybe it was lingering memories of 2020 kind of feeling the same way when Georgia did that. But I told y'all last week I did not have the world's greatest feeling about that game against Kentucky. Not that I ever thought Georgia was going to lose the game. And frankly, during the game on Saturday, never really thought Georgia was going to lose it. But there was just something about that. It's like, ooh, this game doesn't probably feel like it's going to be one for the memory books here. This does not really feel like it's going to be one of those games we look back on and it ends up being really anybody's favorite Georgia game of all time. And then in the midst of the game, I'd say there are moments where like, yeah, it's kind of feeling like I thought it would. And then beyond that, you sort of got to the point where actually maybe this is even a little bit worse than I hoped it would be because, you have the situation when Georgia's up 16-0. They don't get the fourth down conversion. You better believe we'll get there on the show before we're done today. You don't get the fourth down conversion. Then Kentucky marches down the field 99 yards on you and scores. And all of a sudden now it's like, you sort of expected a game with no style points. You sort of expected a game where weather was an issue. But all of a sudden now you're in that position where actually you're having to kind of fight and to sort of preserve the win here for a moment. Now, to Georgia's credit, that's exactly what it does. But the game probably none of us maybe had great vibes about, kind of a tricky spot after a long, tough stretch for UGA, ends up being sort of everything we thought it would be and more. And yet, Georgia also gets the win. They are undefeated in the SEC here again for a second consecutive season. And Georgia looks, by comparison, remarkably consistent compared to, obviously, Tennessee. We're going to have plenty of fun today at the expense of the Tennessee Vols. I can certainly promise you that. They fall flat on their face at South Carolina. Teams like Ohio State and Michigan were not perfect in their own right there on Saturday. You can kind of go through all the annals of the so-called playoff contenders, and you see that what Georgia has now been doing for 11 regular season games, including a wild stretch of 4 straight against rival Florida, super high-ranked Tennessee when the game was played, back-to-back road games in SEC play. And we told you last week how rare it is, more rare than you would imagine, to win on consecutive Saturdays in away stadiums as the visitor in SEC play, that Georgia, by comparison here, actually looks pretty good, right? I mean, and looks better than pretty good. Looks like, once again, the best team in the country, even if not every single moment of the season has been a thing of beauty. Certainly adding it all together, it ends up being a really beautiful story for Georgia this season of, going through a lot of adversity. In some cases, these are even, self-inflicted, unforced errors, but nonetheless, still kind of standing tall here. And in light of that, I think we sort of learned two things about Georgia. And as you sort of think about the ultimate mission of go for 2 in 22 and winning another national championship, as you sort of think about all of that, I think that Saturday, both because of what happened to Georgia and what happened around Georgia, became another pretty important data point for what's going to matter here down the stretch. And something to me is incredibly clear now that I don't know that I fully could have articulated this prior to Saturday, but it seems obvious now. Let me let you hear some of Kirby Smart, and then it's going to build me to the point that I want to make here. First of all, just sort of starting in on, kind of what Georgia's been through, what it's accomplished, what the game meant. Let me let you hear a little bit of Kirby talking about that from Saturday, this from the post-game press conference.
I don't want to say lethargic win, but it was very ho-hum. I feel like, everybody across the league, including us, is at a point. We just had 4 games in a row, 3 on the road, that were really tough and really physical. We knew this gauntlet was coming, and our guys put their head down and worked really hard. Regardless of who we faced, we've stood up to the test that we've been asked to, and I'm proud of what they've done, but we're not where we need to be, put it that way. We've got to improve on both sides of the ball.
So Kirby uses the word gauntlet there, and I think that's absolutely right. And this is the thing that's more clear to me now than it was prior to Saturday, that the number one contender for Georgia, the number one competitor for Georgia, is not any one single opponent. In other words, if you said, BA, you've been talking all year long about go for 2 in 22, Georgia winning a second straight national championship. If that doesn't happen, who's the team that ruins that? Who's the team that messes all that up? And I think after Saturday, what I've come to believe is that there is no one team that's going to be the most obvious likely foil here. Now, the best team I think that Georgia could play is Ohio State. Most of you'd probably agree with that there as well. But even Ohio State, I don't think quite rise to that level. I certainly never thought Tennessee was that team necessarily, and on Saturday against South Carolina, they proved why that was true. But as Kirby Smart says, it's not any one team that you're worried about. This is not one of those years in which, like last year, you're trying to get over the hump and prove that you can beat Alabama. Georgia proved that a year ago. There is no, final boss of the video game. There's no Bowser's Castle here that Georgia has to go through to win a national championship. That's not what this year is. What this year is what Kirby Smart said. It's like just going through the gauntlet. And I think what Smart, in a roundabout way, was saying there and has said in some of the other kind of clips from that press conference is that when you play Kentucky in the 4th consecutive game of 4 straight weeks of rival Florida, highly ranked and, certainly very good Tennessee, if not playoff worthy Tennessee, but certainly very good Tennessee, and then back-to-back road games in SEC play, as you kind of go through that, when you're facing the 4th of those in Kentucky on Saturday, there is a little bit of residue left over from the previous games, that you're actually not just competing against the Wildcats, you're also competing against your own fatigue after all that you've been through over the course of these last few weeks, and I think that's right. And even though Georgia was a really big favorite in the game against Kentucky, the truth is Georgia's going to be potentially a pretty sizable favorite in the SEC championship coming up in a couple of weeks, certainly the Tech game on Saturday, but then beyond that, the SEC championship game coming up in a couple of weeks, all of the potential college football playoff games you could play there as well. And yet winning a national championship is really hard because you're asked to kind of run through a gauntlet over the course of the time, or over the course of the full season. We say it all the time, hey, would you take so-and-so team or would you take the field? Well, right now, Georgia's in a situation where it's having to compete against the full field here and trying to maintain a level of consistency from a week-to-week basis. And you see across the board here in college football, Tennessee, the biggest example against South Carolina, but also Michigan struggling with Illinois. Ohio State more competitive for a while against Maryland than some would have thought. On and on you can go here. UNC losing to Georgia Tech, who, by the way, comes to Athens on Saturday. You see examples here which just maintaining that week-to-week consistency is not an easy thing to do, and it won't be easy for Georgia the rest of the way either. There is no one team obviously most likely to beat Georgia, but winning all the games that Georgia still has remaining, which hopefully counts to 15 before it's all said and done, winning all of those games is really hard. And going through the 4-game slate of Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky, that is also probably harder than Georgia made it look. And that's kind of been the story now for Georgia for a couple of years. They're just sort of marching through, doing their thing. And when it's all said and done, you're like, gosh, nobody's done this in a long time. Nobody's, you haven't had very many teams winning back-to-back road games in the SEC. You haven't had very many teams in the history of this league winning, full slates of conference play back-to-back, undefeated 2 years in a row. As you're going through it just sort of seems like Georgia doing what it does. But when it's all said and done, you're sort of left to conclude that actually Georgia just sort of doing what it does is actually kind of accomplishing a good bit of history throughout all of that. In fact, let you hear more from Kirby Smart on this about, kind of what Georgia's been through, kind of where it's standing here right now after, once again, posting an undefeated regular season mark in SEC play. Here's Kirby again.
Hard to do. Last 40 years, there's only been two. And it's hard to win on the road in the SEC. You look across the country today, you see the environments people were playing in. You see it's different. You find out real quick who really wants to play football and who's just a football fan. And you have to be able to win in games like that, especially in November.
Don't you love that clip from Kirby? He's saying there, hey, do you like football or do you like the idea of football? Do you like to put on the uniform and, pose for the gram? Or do you like to get out there and fight and scratch and claw and do what needs to be done in a game like this? Are you willing to do the hard work when winning pretty is apparently not an option? A cold weather day against a physical team and all that kind of stuff. On Saturday, you were kind of led to believe that, hey, winning pretty today, creating a lot of style points, that might not be possible. So are you willing to kind of win the street fight version of football, which is what Georgia was facing there against Kentucky? And once again, it sort of accentuates the point that I was making a moment ago. There is no obvious threat to Georgia right now. There is no, boy, when you get to this team, you're going to have to really prove something. No, Ohio State's very, very good, and I believe they are the second best team in the country right now. I'm not certainly downplaying their ability here. I think that'd be a fair fight if Georgia plays Ohio State, but it's not like you look at Ohio State and you're like, there's no way Georgia can beat Ohio State. The way that in maybe previous years, some would have said, I'm not going to believe that Georgia can get over the hump of, like, say, Alabama until they actually do it. There isn't one of those kinds of teams right now. But even without the obvious threat, the challenge of winning a national championship is still hard because just being a consistent week-to-week winner itself is not easy. No one could have predicted that, Kentucky would beat Georgia, but at the same time, you're not all that surprised that Kentucky competed with Georgia because that fact is, in college football on a week-to-week basis, weird stuff happens. South Carolina just annihilated Tennessee. That's another one of those weird results that just being consistently good week to week is not as hard, or should say is a lot harder than sometimes it seems like it should be because of all the teams that fail in their attempt to be able to do that. So that's one of the things that we've learned here this week from Georgia, which is that the real threat to Georgia's national championship pursuit, the real obstacle that stands in its way is not any one specific team. It's the overall grind that adds up over the course of a 15-game year, a 15-game season, where you were just asked to be consistently good over the course of the entire time, and we're kind of getting to that stretch of the season where any one slip-up could kind of call the whole thing into question and end up either eliminating you from championship contention or making winning a championship far more difficult because of the circumstance you put yourself in, and that's just kind of where Georgia is right now. But here's the other thing that I believe we learned on Saturday, which is the reason why Georgia is able to maintain the consistency that it has. The reason why it's able to go on the road in cold Kentucky and get out of there without ever really feeling like they were going to lose, and the reason why they were able to do that Mississippi State and obviously handling business against Tennessee before that and all the other SEC games prior to that is the fact that defense travels. And I don't even know that Saturday was necessarily a great day for the Georgia defense. I don't know that it was. But have you ever been happier as a Georgia fan to have a great defense than you are right now? Once again, using the comparison of the Tennessee-South Carolina game. Tennessee, 63 points they gave up to South Carolina. You can say what you want to about anything else. 63 points they gave up to South Carolina. I said this on Twitter. You got to go back to the beginning of October to find Georgia giving up 68 points in total. That's how wildly different these teams are right now. And so on a week-to-week basis, hey, can you score enough points to win? Maybe you can, maybe you can. But if you know your defense is going to go out there and hold its opponent to a low total each and every Saturday, well, the job of winning just got way easier. And the Kentucky offense is no great shakes necessarily. But knowing that on this particular Saturday, when your own points were hard to come by, knowing that you were able to keep them to 6 in their own stadium in a game they kind of had circled from the beginning of the year, all of a sudden you made the task of winning in that game much easier. And this consistent week-to-week performance from the defense now over the course of the last couple of years, this sort of helps explain what makes Georgia so different than all the other teams that it's playing. It's just able to go out there and give its own shot at victory, a big shot in the arm by what it's able to do on that side of the ball. And as Kirby kind of talked about, in the game against the Wildcats this past Saturday, it wasn't always perfect. There were some moments on Saturday where Georgia maybe wasn't customarily what it had been defensively. But when it had to be at its best, it found a way to kind of be there. Kirby on the defense once again from Saturday.
It was bend but don't break. We didn't stop them. They ended up getting down to the red area. The wins on fourth down were the difference in the game. And our ability to stop them on fourth down was big, but our inability on some of the third downs to get off the field hurt us some.
So let me see if I can kind of sum all of this up. As Kirby Smart says there, hey, when they had to get off the field, you got the Keely Ringo interception. You stopped them on fourth down. When you really had to on Saturday, you were able to do that. And we're kind of in this moment right now where the season just feels really long. I mean, obviously it's fun and entertainment for us. It's hard work for the coaches and players. But doesn't it just sort of feel like a grind right now? I mean, doesn't it just sort of feel like that Georgia's been kind of fighting its way to the end of the season now for quite some time, and you're not quite yet to that sort of postseason run, the go for 2 in 22 season. It's not SEC Championship Saturday. It's not college football playoff. You're still doing the hard work that's got to be done to get ready for all of that. We're kind of in that moment in which the grind just feels as heavy as it's going to feel at any point in time in the year, I believe, and yet Georgia's keeping on grinding through all of that. And these are the moments in which you're glad to have the kind of team, if you're a UGA fan, that embraces the physicality and brings its defense on the road with it to games like this or any other place that it's going to play here the rest of the way. That ability to show up and play consistently week to week on that side of the ball. It is not as easy as Georgia has made it look. And frankly, on Saturday, it didn't often look easy at all. But the job got done. Georgia remains undefeated. The mission of go for 2 in 22 is still fully in place here. And that is the kind of thing that Georgia fans ought to be pretty happy about. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And we're available as a podcast wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, worldfamousdawgnation.com, all kinds of ways for you to be a part of the program. We just really, really appreciate you doing that, and we really appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. They are a great sponsor. We're actually going to see a pretty fun shout-out to Pella Window and Door of Georgia before the show is done today, so I'm actually kind of excited about that. We'll get that to you here coming up in just a little bit. But also, I just am so thankful for the great stuff that Pella Window and Door of Georgia does for us each and every day here when it comes to energy-efficient windows and doors, keeping the stuff on the outside of your house where it's supposed to be, that cold weather you've been dealing with, rainy weather from time to time. You don't want that creeping into your house, and that's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about for you. They can prevent that. You can find them online, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. You also give them a call, 678-638-1496. That's 678-638-1496. Sit down, talk to one of those Pella experts, and they can walk you through all the installation options you have, all of the product line they have. You can also actually stop by and see them at that Experience Center right there in Duluth and put your hands on the product and feel what makes it better. In survey after survey, homeowners right here in our area have recognized Pella Window and Door of Georgia as a real brand leader for exterior doors and windows, and they can show you that themselves when you stop by and visit them in Duluth or when you reach out. pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation, or give them a call, 678-638-1496. That's 678-638-1496. Just make sure you tell them that BA from DawgNation said they'd take good care of you, because I know that they will. All right, we're going to do a lot here. It's John Stinchcomb coming up in a moment, and that's going to be fun to kind of get into some of the stuff from Saturday with John. So we'll do that. We're going to hear in a moment as well from Kirby Smart on what ended up being one of the more interesting decisions from the game on Saturday, choosing to go for it to begin the fourth quarter down near the goal line. Doesn't work. Kentucky comes back and scores. The game gets closer at that point than it had been all day long. Was that a mistake by Kirby Smart? We'll debate that here in a moment. Let you hear what Kirby Smart had to say about all of that. But I also want to give you a couple of quick looks ahead at great stuff that's going to be going on in the next few days here as it relates to Dog Nation. Let me start from the back, work my way forward. So 2 Saturdays from now, Go for 2 in 22 season kicks into high gear with the SEC Championship. And while George is not going to be looking past Georgia Tech for Saturday, we have a chance to look past that for right now to tell you about our big Go for 2 in 22 tailgate that's going to be taking place on that particular day. What an incredible thing that's going to be. Live from the Home Depot backyard, getting ready for a wonderful, wonderful tailgate day that day. It starts 3 hours prior to the game for Georgia and LSU that day. And here's the thing we have a handful of tickets left on this, and if you want to get in and secure your chance at a second-generation Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt. You've seen me wearing the original design of the Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt. You've seen that. But if you want a second-generation Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt, we only have room for the first 200 people to sign up to get those. And so we're down to like the final handful of tickets left on the chance to get a new second-generation Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt. Now, when you also sign up for it, you get open bar and the food and the entertainment and all that kind of stuff right there at the Home Depot backyard, which could not be closer to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There's no opportunity to tailgate anywhere that's any closer than all of that. Could not be closer. So you get a chance to be a part of that. But if you want your opportunity to get one of those Go for 2 in 22 t-shirts, you got to make sure you check that out right now. So go to DawgNation.com. You can click the link there. Go ahead and get your tickets there for that. Final tickets here to be able to secure a Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt. Final tickets there on that. So DawgNation.com for more on that. Then prior to that, next Wednesday, we've got a big event taking place at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Now, a lot of you have been saying, hey, when are you guys going to be back at Marlowe's again? Well, that's coming up for us here very, very soon. Not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday. Prior to the kind of the week leading to the SEC Championship, we're going to be live at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven at 6 p.m. That's, of course, 3575 Durden Drive. That's Wednesday, November 30th for a huge show with our friends at Marlowe's at 6 p.m. So we'll be previewing the SEC Championship. We'll be talking about Georgia's path to the playoff. We're going to have an incredible time there. Go for 2 in 22 season with a live event there at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven coming up next Wednesday, November 30th at 6 p.m. We can't wait to see you there for all of that. We'll tell you more about this in the days to come. Obviously, we announced the Marlowe's event this past Friday, but want to make sure you're fully aware of all of that. So is that all clear? So we got some big stuff going on. You can go to DawgNation.com to find out more details about all of it. Now, let's get ready to go around the doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at AAA. And this is one of those situations here where there was a big moment in this game. It was, 4th down at the goal line to begin the fourth quarter. Georgia was up 16-0, and Georgia goes for it, runs the ball, doesn't get it. Kentucky now has possession of the football. They march down 99 yards and score. Ultimately, it's not consequential in the outcome of the game, but it did create probably the only moment from the game that generated any real debate whatsoever. And here is the thought process that I'm hearing from some people, that by being up 16, because that's 2 touchdowns and 2 two-point conversions, some are calling that what they're saying as a 2-possession game, and that by kicking a field goal, you have a chance to go up 19-0, which in the minds of some is a 3-possession game, and that is what Kirby Smart should have done. That's the kind of general feeling that's out there. Smart was asked on Saturday after the game, kind of from that context of why go for it as opposed to kicking the field goal. This is what Smart said after the game on Saturday about that particular topic. Take a listen to this.
I wanted to show confidence in our players. And if I had a chance to go out there and do it again today, I'm going to go over there and say we're going to do it again because that's what I believe in. That decision was made 15 years ago on philosophy.
So what's funny about this is that in a similar situation in the Tennessee game back in 2020, Kirby Smart said almost the exact same thing, that that decision was made for me years ago about going for it on 4th down. In that particular case, it was going for it on 4th down in his own territory. In this case, you're talking about going for it on the goal line situation. Now, I'm going to kind of break this up into 2 parts, and one of these parts I'm going to talk about later in the show. Later in the show, I'm going to kind of get into, if you are going to go for it on 4th down, the decision to kind of run the ball the way you did there. That, to me, needs to be a separate conversation. It's probably the most important part of all of this, but I'm going to push that for later in the show. For now, just focusing in on the idea of going for it on 4th down. And I actually think that Kirby Smart makes a good bit of sense there. And you can go to like the DawgNation YouTube page and watch the full press conference, and you can kind of get the full context here, the back and forth that Kirby had with reporters on this. First of all, I kind of dispute the idea that 16 points is a two-possession game. I just think mathematically, if you look at the typical conversion rates for two-point conversions across college football, the odds of making two straight two-point conversions, that's really only about 25%. So I sort of dispute that 16-0 is a two-possession game when it really takes 4 scoring plays for anybody to create 16 points there. So I sort of dispute that. And if you go up 19-0, if you kick the field goal there, instead of going for it on fourth down, you're still in a situation where 3 touchdowns beat you. And that's true. If it's 16-0, it's 19-0. I would argue that down near your own goal line, that only going up 19-0 doesn't actually change the way in which Kentucky calls the game any different than 16-0 would. So I sort of dispute the idea that 16 points is somehow a two-possession game and 19 points is somehow a three-possession game, because in that situation, you're still talking about being beaten by 3 touchdowns, where if you actually score the touchdown, now you've sort of put yourself in a situation where it takes more than 3 touchdowns to beat you. So from that standpoint, I think that Kirby Smart's right. But here's the other thing that I just think is generally right across the board, is that if you care about like how the math of this is kind of determined or anything like that, and sometimes, I do, sometimes I don't, I guess. Sometimes it's sort of beyond my ability to comprehend. But if you care about any of that kind of stuff, the thing that you understand here is that in any situation where a coach has a decision to make, making the decision to be aggressive is generally speaking the better overall choice, especially when you have the perceived better team. That when you're perceived to have the better team, when you're perceived to be the favorite, the more you can do to push the issue during a game probably makes the most sense there. So I actually don't have a real big problem with Kirby Smart going for it on fourth down. Now, I also have to admit I would not have been surprised had he kicked the field goal there, because clearly there's some value in on a day in which points were hard to come by for both teams. There's some value in getting some points, going up 19 there. I wouldn't have been surprised if Kirby Smart did it. But I actually believe if you want to play the odds, if you want to play the percentages, that choosing to go for it on fourth down there was probably the right choice to make. And generally speaking, I like the aggressive version of Kirby Smart more so than the other. I mean, Kirby actually said that after the Oregon game to begin this year, is that we want to call the game aggressively, we want to play aggressively, we want to be an aggressive team. And I think aggressive is a pretty good target to shoot for. That you make winnable games into losable games sometimes, I think, by being less aggressive when you could. That when you're pensive with your decision making, when you're timid with your decision making, all of a sudden you create an opportunity for the underdog that might not necessarily need to be there. So across the board, I prefer an aggressive Kirby going for it on fourth down, going for it, trading a field goal opportunity for a touchdown. I'll take that version of Kirby Smart across the board more so than the other, and I think you'll be better off for it, especially given the fact that Georgia's on a mission here to go for 2-22. The path towards that championship accomplishment, I believe, is sort of better traveled by being aggressive than the opposite. So I actually don't have a huge problem with Kirby Smart going for it there when he did. Now, the decision when you did go for it to run the football and to make an aggressive decision but use a conservative play call in light of that aggressive decision, that's a little bit different topic, and we're going to get to that more before the show's done here today. But kind of a little bit of a thought starter on that to begin with, and if you've got your own thoughts on that, I'm sure we'll give a chance for you to weigh in, either to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily or in our comment section for R.S. Andrews Cool Down when the show is done. But for now, though, let me remind you that's Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at AAA. And, of course, AAA is a name that we know when it comes to a roadside. Listen, I'm traveling around this weekend a lot, being there for the Buford-Walton game on Friday, in Kentucky there on Saturday, and then obviously back here in Georgia again for the show on Monday. So I'm always thankful that AAA and that membership card goes in my pocket with me everywhere that I go. But it's not just roadside assistance I want you to think about when you think about our friends at AAA. I want you to think about them across the board when it comes to your insurance needs, including your home insurance there as well. Because when you get your home insurance through AAA, there are all kinds of options that you can benefit from, all kinds of savings opportunities that come your way when you get your insurance through AAA, including claim-free rewards. This is a really cool thing, that when you have claim-free rewards with AAA, you actually can get cash back every policy year that you remain claim-free. Just one of the ways in which AAA wants to show you some support for your support of them and being a part of a relationship with them through your home insurance, and they're willing to kind of give you that claim-free reward and give you a little bit extra boost for being claim-free with your home there. There's all kinds of other discounts there as well that you can be a part of there too. So find out more about this by checking out our friends at AAA. You can go to AAA.com/home insurance. That's AAA.com/home insurance. You can also give them a call, 833-718-2075. That's 833-718-2075. And you can find a branch near you. So before we're done today, as I said before, we're going to kind of get back into that fourth down decision from Kirby Smart. I don't have a problem with him going for it on fourth down. If you are going to go for it on fourth down, I think there's a little bit different play you could have called, and later I'm going to share the numbers with you as exactly, maybe why that is, which I think lays it out in kind of pretty crystal clear fashion. So we'll talk more about that before the show is done. But Georgia does go undefeated in SEC play, moves on to get ready for Georgia Tech on Saturday, and the mission of go for 2 in 22 still fully intact there as well. So let's talk about all that for now with our good friend John Stinchcomb, the great former Georgia All-American, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will say hello to John Stinchcomb. John knows what it's like to go on the road and have a tough, hard-fought win in SEC play, and that is exactly what Georgia did on Saturday. So, John, if you don't mind, let's kind of start right there. I said this before you joined us, that there's an element of what Georgia has been doing this year, last few weeks in particular, certainly the last couple of years of now being undefeated in SEC play 2 years in a row. This is not as easy as Georgia has made it look. And the real threat to Georgia trying to win another national championship is not any team. That was true even before Tennessee lost on Saturday. There isn't some behemoth team out there that's going to prevent that from happening. But it's all of this adding up together, the grind, the gauntlet, as Kirby Smart said it. That's the real challenge. That's the real contender here. And can you go through another year of this without succumbing to the weight of the fact that being a consistent high-level performer week to week in college football is just not an easy thing to do? Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would. I think it's become one of the toughest feats to accomplish, and it's because the expectations are so high. Every week you have to play your best football. You have to be able to win. Right now, it seems like you have to either go undefeated or one loss, or all your hopes and dreams are gone. Different from the NFL and different from college football only a few years ago because of the number of games that you play. Instead of, what used to be a 10 or 11 game season, it's 12 plus the conference championship, and one slip up against a good team and your hopes and dreams are all but crushed. So for Georgia to be able to go back-to-back undefeated in the SEC, I think speaks to the level of performance, even when it is a 16-6 victory against a good, capable Kentucky team that also has its flaws. It's more about what Georgia has done, and Georgia performed on Saturday in a way that I think is almost to be expected after that 4-week run where it's nothing but big games, and you come into yet another SEC matchup where conditions are not ideal. It's cold, it's windy. The opponent isn't at the same caliber. You don't have that same energy in the stadium that you would against like a Tennessee a couple weeks prior. So that's a difficult game mentally as much as physically, and Georgia once again comes away with a 2-score victory. So I think it just speaks to the level of consistency that's been created in the program.
Yeah, and the other thing too is when you think about, okay, so we saw South Carolina play Florida last Saturday. Florida looked great, South Carolina looked terrible, and then on the heels of that, Florida goes out and loses to Vanderbilt, and South Carolina goes out and hung 63 points on Tennessee. And the context I'm trying to provide here is that, so by everything we've seen thus far this year, Georgia-Kentucky is supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be an easy game because Kentucky had just lost to Vanderbilt. And yet Kirby Smart, I think, had tried to set the stage for this, is that you can't necessarily use last week's result as some sort of predictive model for how this game is going to go. If that were the case, we'd all be rich because we could make $1 million betting on these games if all you had to do is look at what happened the previous week to decide what was going to happen this week. And maybe when some Georgia fans hear Kirby Smart saying something like that, it sounds like coach speak. But when you see the other results that I just mentioned of sort of wildly different performances week to week, I think it just sort of speaks to that, hey, I don't care what the odds makers say, and I don't care what Kentucky has been doing. There is an element of that game that Kirby sort of knew was going to be a challenge, turned out to be that way, and that's beyond just coach speak, because you can see other teams kind of falling prey to this all across the board here. There is something to this that, hey, you just don't know from Saturday to Saturday which team's going to show up. Maybe it's the team that lost to Vanderbilt, or maybe it's a team that went on the road and beat Florida earlier this year, or whatever else. It's like you really just sort of you don't really know from week to week the kind of team you're going to be playing against, and I think that Kirby had some sort of anticipation that would likely be the case.
Isn't this one of the reasons why we love college football? I mean, probably one of the reasons why you love and hate college football,
Yeah.
but one of the reasons why you love it. You have to play the game. You cannot just base it on the records coming in. And this isn't a video game. It's not where, you look and there's static numbers on a sheet of these players versus the other players in a vacuum. It's an emotional game. It's a game planning week in and week out. There's a number of conditions that change between the games and how they unfold. If there was early turnovers or if there's a momentum swing, that's what makes the game awesome. So I think anticipating based on just what you see on paper and how teams stack up in a vacuum is so unrealistic. And one of the reasons why it's such a fun game and event that we look forward to on a weekly basis is because you have to play them. You can't just match them up and make the predictions. And if so, all those talking heads before the game, they would probably be right a heck of a lot more times than they end up being, right? You look at the predictions before a game and the consistency at which you can call the upsets and the victor, it's not consistent. And I think that's one of the best things about it is you have to play it, and it gives the underdog or the underappreciated team an opportunity to say, hey, there's some anomalies out there in our record, and we get to start anew every Saturday we take the field.
Before we move off this Kentucky game, let me also ask about the other kind of hot topic here, which is Kirby choosing to go for it on fourth down from the goal line to begin the fourth quarter. You don't get that. Kentucky marches down and scores, but to me, you sort of break this into two parts, and you've got the decision to go for it on fourth down, which I like, the decision to kind of, try a short yardage running play there, which I probably don't like, to be completely honest with you. John, as an offensive lineman yourself, what do you make of the decision to be aggressive there, shooting for the touchdown, but to also maybe choose a conservative play call of sorts in the midst of trying to be aggressive? What did you make of that sequence?
Yeah, so let's break it into two parts. First, I love the fact that we're going for it. I think you have to be aggressive. I think that's the mentality of the team. It puts faith in the offense. It also puts faith in your defense, saying, hey, if we don't get this, it's a 99-yard field, and we've got one of the best defenses in the game. So I have complete confidence that we can shut it down. Now, how it played out, it leaves room to second guess. You didn't get the touchdown. You didn't convert. The defense allows the longest drive of the season against them, both unexpected. As for the plays that you call, there's so much work. I'd love to sit here and agree with you of the conservative call. But when you game plan in the week, you know what you can expect in those situations from the defense. You know their alignment, you know their preferred packages and how they're going to attack you. So when you go into that game, there's always plays that you like in the goal line, you like in short yardage situations, and they just didn't execute. we got stuffed, and it leaves room for, golly, they should have spread the ball out. And there's so many different routes that you can run on the edge these days where we're not going to call them pick routes, but that's exactly what they are. And put the ball in Brock Bowers or Darnell Washington's hands, and who's going to stop them for half a yard, right?
Yeah.
I get all those things, but you go in with a game plan, you feel confident, and with our offensive line, the way they performed this year, I think it puts a lot of faith in them. They just didn't answer the bell. And, that's one play out of a number. Really, there was a couple of plays in that short yardage need to convert situation where we didn't come through. And you're grateful at the end of the day it's against Kentucky and it's not against LSU in the SEC championship or the college football playoff series. But I am 100% in agreement that that's, going for it in those situations is putting faith in your entire team, not just the offense, but the defense, that if we don't convert, you're going to make it happen for us and make us right. So I think it just speaks to the confidence that they had, and it just wasn't a well-executed situation for them.
I think it's a really good point, and your point of view is a little bit different than mine, but I think you're absolutely right, and this is obviously the perspective as a former player, is you could have reasons for wanting to do what you did that go beyond just trying to score a touchdown in that given moment, and I do understand that nature of coaching, that this is about a big picture decision for Kirby Smart in a lot of ways, and this is about more than just sort of the granular nature of, hey, let's get this touchdown against Kentucky. No, maybe this is, hey, let me show the kind of faith in my guys necessary to get them ready for we want to go for the next several weeks. So I totally buy into that as an idea, even if I didn't love the strategic element of that play in that moment. I certainly can acknowledge that. I think you're bringing up a really good point. To turn the page here for a moment, John, it's Georgia Tech on Saturday, and in light of everything that, kind of Georgia's been through and done, the Tech game always kind of comes sort of a weird spot on the calendar because, you've just been through a gauntlet in the SEC. You got the SEC championship here coming up. Georgia Tech's obviously, once again, not a very good team, but they are playing way better now than they have, certainly in previous years, and certainly way better than they were at the beginning of this year. They beat North Carolina on Saturday. They won some games with Brent Key as interim coach, playing a little bit better brand of football here. So to set the stage for getting it done one more time here in the regular season, playing Tech in Athens for the first time since 2018 because of the pandemic year in 2020. To set the stage for all of this, John, what does the Georgia Tech rivalry mean to you in particular?
Well, I've always appreciated it and loved it, and the separation between the two teams has grown wider and wider. I think we can all recognize that, but it's part of Thanksgiving for almost every family across the state. This is a part of it, and it's become tradition. Now, I think it sets up really well for Georgia, and not so great for Georgia Tech because we're coming off a road win against Kentucky, where we threw the ball less than 20 times, and we played a physical style of football. But there's some criticism of we should have beaten a Kentucky team that was coming off an ugly week prior, and it's just as much of a mental approach than anything else as you go into these weeks. And for Georgia, there's some motivating factors that might have been minimized when you're going against the Georgia Tech team that's reeling with an interim coach. But now you're saying, hey, this is a capable team. They just beat a ranked North Carolina and are playing their best ball of the season, which a focused, motivated Georgia is a foe that not many teams want to face, and Georgia Tech is certainly on that list. So, I expect an early performance from our dogs that seals what would become an easy win is kind of how I see this game playing out. But as the series goes, I think this is part of the fabric of Georgia football. At the end of the year, we get to play Georgia Tech, and is there implications and significance? Has that changed over the decades? You better believe it. The years of Georgia Tech and Georgia being comparable in a skill level as where they are as a program, those are gone. And I'm not bashing on Georgia Tech. I'm more of a realist at this point. I think those that would be Georgia Tech fans would come to that same realization, even if they wouldn't want to admit it. But it just speaks to the direction of college football. But I still think there's a place for this rivalry game. And, if it ever comes to a point where it doesn't make sense anymore, I will understand it, just because it's almost like there's a couple different leagues of college football that are being played right now, and Georgia is one, and Georgia Tech is in a different league, and that's just being realistic. And so if and when we come to that point, it would be a sad turning of the page, but for right now, I still thoroughly enjoy that matchup and feel like it's part of an expected portion of this holiday season.
want to ask you one more thing before we let you go, John. Before that, I want to remind folks, speaking of the holiday season, one of the things we're going to have coming up to begin the month of December is the SEC Championship. And I want to give a quick shout out here and make sure you're aware of something, that if you're coming into town for the SEC Championship, that when you're trying to find that hotel, and sometimes it's hard to get hotels in downtown Atlanta, and sometimes the hotels in downtown Atlanta are crazy expensive, and yet you're thinking, well, I got to have some sort of like way to get to the stadium on Saturday, but maybe downtown doesn't make the most sense for you. I want you to consider this area where you actually do our show from each and every day. We're right here in Dunwoody, and the Dunwoody area is a great place to consider staying when you're going to the SEC Championship. Or, by the way, maybe if there's a college football playoff game being played here for the Peach Bowl, also maybe kind of keep that in mind there too. But certainly for the SEC Championship coming up in a couple of Saturdays here, the Dunwoody area is a great place for you on that, because there's a whole bunch of hotel rooms. You got basically like 21 different hotel rooms, like kind of right here in our area, 9 different hotels in total here. Plus, the way we're kind of situated, you kind of have like the Dunwoody MARTA station, the Sandy Springs MARTA station. So depending where you are, you can kind of, in a lot of ways, just sort of walk to that MARTA station, which will take you right to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's incredibly convenient. Plus, you got great shopping at the mall right here. You've got every kind of restaurant you could want, like really nice, fancy restaurants. You want more like quick service type stuff. You have all of that right here in this kind of Dunwoody area there as well. It's a great place to kind of make it not just a football game, but kind of a fun holiday style weekend with great shopping, great restaurants, tons of hotel options. So I want you to go to this website. It's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. That's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. Really think about this. If you're coming in for the SEC Championship, you don't have to stay downtown. In fact, you might actually have more fun staying right here in Dunwoody, and yet you can use MARTA to get very easily to the SEC Championship if you want to. So you get a great option for hotels, all kinds of restaurants, lots of shopping there as well. This Dunwoody area where we do our show from each and every day, a great place for you to kind of make your home base, getting ready for the SEC Championship coming up in a couple of weeks. That website, one more time, discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. That is discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. All right, John, very quickly before we let you go, we certainly appreciate your time. So the thing that I find amazing right now is how much disarray was seemingly introduced back into the college football playoff conversation because of the events of Saturday. Tennessee eliminated as a contender. Michigan, Ohio State, both a little shaky there at times. TCU keeps right on winning. USC is winning. You're sort of left to wonder, well, is the ACC now kind of back in this thing a bit here on Saturday? There were a lot of really crazy results, and all of it kind of happening below Georgia. It's kind of fun to think of yourself being UGA right now, kind of above the fray on this. But this playoff conversation, as wild as I can remember it being this late in the season, where I'm not quite so sure with certainty I can say who's going to make the playoff. The loser of the Michigan-Ohio State game, are they still in it? ACC champ still in it? It's really fun to think about how crazy the debate's going to be over the course of the next couple of weeks' worth of games, rivalry week, then championship week. It's about to get crazy. Don't you get that sense?
Oh, yeah, and that's the direction college football has been pointed for quite some time. When we first started looking at college football playoff picture, it was originally intended because it was so hard to identify the top 2 teams. We need to give a third and fourth team at least a shot because, it's, during the era, you're going, we've kind of snubbed this third pick. And now you're looking at it and going, we have a clear number 1, right? Georgia is the best team in college football based on what we've seen thus far. And I would argue that, barring a slip up by Ohio State, there's a clear top 2 as you project. But what happened this past Saturday and understanding where we're at with the college football playoffs with 4 teams, man, what a shakeup. And there's that argument for more teams to get involved, and you look back and nobody's looking back really, but what used to be 2 teams was pretty easily identifiable. But right now, finding that top 4, it got that much muddier and murkier this past week. For Georgia, I don't know if a TCU or a USC scares you. And the way Michigan looked this past Saturday, they wouldn't either. And every team, you look at those weeks and you go, well, if you're looking at the Missouri game or Kent State or the lack of dominance in the Kentucky game for Georgia, but all that kind of pales in comparison when you're talking about the way the best teams play in the best games, in the big games. And Georgia continues to show, Tennessee is a great example of that, when it's all on the line. Oregon, first week of the season, Georgia's best performance is far superior to anything that we've seen from any other school out there. So, again, pointing back to the fact that college football now, the expectation is so high that you'd never have an off week. That's really hard to accomplish, and it makes for a lot of debate this time of year in identifying who the top 4 teams are.
John, great stuff. Thank you so much. I know we're coming up on Thanksgiving. It's a great chance for me to say how thankful I am for your contributions to our show each and every week. I hope you're getting ready for a wonderful time with your family and plenty of good food and good times. And obviously we got great football to come on the other side of the holiday, but this is a special week for many of us away from football because we love to eat, but also we love to think about all the things we have to be grateful for here around Dog Nation. You are certainly on our list. So thank you very much. Enjoy the day coming up, and we'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to hang out in person again here very soon, too.
Appreciate it, B.A. Always grateful for the Dog Nation at large and being a part of this show. And our friendship, as it's grown over the years. A lot to be thankful for. Go Dogs.
Great stuff, John. Thanks so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, let me just say one more thing to what John was saying. Now, first of all, completely echoing what I said to him a moment ago. We are so grateful for guys like that. I mean, former players that spend time with us on the show here. That's always one of those things we're just really grateful for. And John does a great job on that. But he's talking about, when you think about what Georgia could be facing in the playoff. I mean, Georgia was, some people care about point spread, some people don't. But just to kind of give you a little bit of sort of context about expectations. Georgia was a 22.5-point favorite at Kentucky on Saturday. If Georgia played USC in the playoff, there's a chance they may be a 20-point favorite in that game. And they'd be more than a 2-touchdown favorite against TCU. They would be, because TCU's power rated most, by most folks, TCU's power rated ahead of USC. Georgia would be, as John said, a pretty strong prohibitive favorite against a team like Michigan, for instance. The only real narrow point spread that might exist for Georgia in a college ball playoff game is probably against Ohio State. Georgia would still be favored, but not by a huge total or anything like that. So the point here is that in terms of what it takes to win a national championship, you're also going to have these games where, from a point spread standpoint, Georgia is thought to be an easy winner. But winning all the games that you're supposed to win easily is still not necessarily an easy thing to do. That the gauntlet is what's tough. It's the week-to-week grind of having to show up and play consistently. That's the thing that's the real challenge. And as we said before, that's the number one nemesis standing in Georgia's way. It's not any one team. It's the sum total of all of the teams that Georgia has now had to go through for 2 years on the way to all of this. And every single one of those games leaves a little bit of residue that you sort of have to keep playing with the following week, and maintaining that consistency just not an easy thing to do. In fact, we'll have more evidence of that here coming up in a moment. Before that, though, how about a chance to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean? Now, I have got a short getaway with our friends at Royal Caribbean coming up here really soon, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to tell you more about that here coming up. It's going to be my chance to be on Wonder of the Seas, and I'm getting a chance to kind of do a quick getaway with just my wife. This is one of those things where if you got a family, you sort of understand this. It's like, hey, sometimes it's about the entire family. And in February, our full family is going to be going. My wife, my 2 kids, we're all going to be going on board Wonder of the Seas for a big 7-night sailing, which I'm really excited about. Coming up pretty soon, though, just for a couple of days, my wife and I together, just the 2 of us, going to be getting away on a Royal Caribbean cruise. And that's one of those fun things you're just glad to be able to do, because you got to recharge the batteries. You got to get ready to go for the big Go for 2 in 22 season that's going to be taking place on the other side of all of that. You just want to make sure that you're, kind of ready to go for that. A little bit of a quick getaway certainly helps you with that, and that's what Royal Caribbean is all about. And one of the things I'm really grateful for, living in the Atlanta area where we live, getting a chance to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship is actually a pretty easy thing. Well, what we always do is, and there are ports like, some people like fly down to Miami and go out of there, or like Port Everglades, which is in Fort Lauderdale. In fact, last year for the Orange Bowl, we were actually staying right down the road from the port right there in Fort Lauderdale. But the point is that, there are lots of different places to get on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. But for me, I always just sort of drive down to Port Canaveral, which is just past Orlando. My family, we kind of go to Orlando a decent amount anyway. And so Port Canaveral is just sort of right there. and you get on the ship very easy, and that's what we're going to be doing here coming up in a few days, just for a little quick recharge of the batteries. I would encourage you to do the same thing. And I would definitely encourage you to do that coming up this April for the second ever Dog Nation cruise. Our good friend Jessica Slater, great travel agent, has a website specially made for this, royaldogs.com. That's the website, royaldogs.com. You can find out about us being on board Independence of the Seas, leaving April 24th, going to Nassau in the Bahamas. Perfect day, Coco Cay, that private island right there in the Bahamas there as well. You can also give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She'll tell you all about it, the great stuff that's going to be happening there, special events with Dog Nation, but also the fun to be enjoyed, dining, entertainment, everything else as it relates to Independence of the Seas. You will find out about all of that, and I just think you'll think it's remarkable, because I know that we certainly do, so I can't wait to see you for the second ever cruise with Dog Nation coming up this April. All right, let's dive into some of the SEC through stuff here, cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We had a great time on Saturday night watching Tennessee get absolutely embarrassed by South Carolina. Absolutely embarrassed. And over the course of time, I'm wrong about so much. And I'm sure many of you could make a laundry list of the things that I've been wrong about, and you could probably add even more to it than that. However, one of the things that I've said over the last couple of years that I think keeps being proven true over and over and over again. You do not want to be one of these pillow soft finesse teams. You just don't. And eventually maybe Tennessee won't be one of those teams. Because the truth is that Josh Heupel was dealt a pretty tough hand when he first took over as Tennessee coach. He lost a lot of talent, especially on the defensive side. So he's been facing a tough issue rebuilding the roster. I don't mind telling you that. He's been facing a little bit of an uphill climb. But as it stands right now, the way in which Tennessee's currently built and constructed, they're scoring a bunch of points. They have a lot of really pretty players. A lot of pretty looking scores. 50 points here, 60 points here, whatever. But when it's all said and done, that does not travel on a week-to-week basis. It just doesn't. To be a team that's all offense, very little defense, that may look good on the ESPN highlights, and that may get a lot of fans talking. In fact, there have even been some Georgia fans talking about Tennessee. In a lot of ways, Tennessee's been one of the most talked about teams of this season. But when it's all said and done, that is not a recipe for winning a national championship. Now, if you're LSU and you're the best offense of all time, maybe so. But you still got to have, a little bit of a defensive contribution even on a team like that. But if you're Tennessee and you're all offense, no defense, eventually you're going to get yourself in trouble. And now twice this year, they've gotten themselves in trouble. They came into Athens to begin the month of November, and once they kind of found out what it felt like to be playing against a truly physical team, Tennessee, bad grammar intentional here, they didn't want none. Tennessee did not want none of Georgia that particular day. And that's bad grammar for emphasis. They didn't want to be a part of this. They got pushed around, and they did not push back. And they talked themselves into, well, yeah, neutral field, or yeah, whatever. Yeah, whatever. Well, on Saturday, they go on the road to South Carolina. By the way, this is a South Carolina team that was a dead team walking. And honestly, I'd said this a lot going into last week. This was a Gamecock team that had shown no signs of life in a game against Florida the prior week. And most of you probably didn't have much reason to watch Florida, South Carolina. But if you did pay attention to it, they didn't show anything on either side of the ball. And yet, credit to these Gamecock fans, and I will give them credit, because it takes a lot to fill your stadium that day, make a bunch of noise, be a factor in the game. Clearly they were. That's a loyal fan base. And I know a lot of you, especially if you live over in the east part of Georgia, you don't like South Carolina. I do get that. But you got to give them credit for this. That's a loyal fan base to support that team in that situation. And frankly, I'm going to give Shane Beamer credit here too. You were starting to wonder, how much of that first-year magic, and there was some of that for Beamer last year, how much of that was kind of carrying over to year two. Well, now when you win a game like this against Tennessee, I think you're left to say a good bit of it is. I think that Beamer's a good dude. I do. And I think that he's doing a good job there with that program. Not easy in the current SEC East to find these wins, and yet he found a very big one against Tennessee there on Saturday. But ultimately for the Vols here, this is just a demonstration that you may be pretty and you may score some points and you may do this, you may do that, but ultimately you just want a playoff level team because you couldn't maintain the week-to-week consistency required to be able to do that. And you've got to go back to the drawing board the same way that Alabama had to after this past season, the same way that Ohio State did after this past season, to say, hey, can we be the best offense in college football and find a way to play enough defense? That's what the offseason overhaul was like for Ohio State. They brought in Jim Knowles as their defensive coordinator. They want to score points, but they also want to be able to limit other teams' ability to score points. Ohio State knew last year against Michigan they just got pushed around too much. And I think privately, whether they'll admit it or not, Alabama knows that when they played Georgia in the national championship, Georgia just pushed them around. And if you look at the last 2 seasons here, Georgia has been a much more consistent team week to week than Alabama has been. And it's the ability to play well on both sides of the ball that has been the reason. Alabama defensively is just not what it once was. And now Tennessee's in that same category of kind of show pony team that doesn't really know how to be a workhorse when it really needs to be. And that, to me, is the story of what Tennessee-Alabama is all about. We're going to make fun of them more with our golden shoes later on, but that's kind of the story for the Vols there on the field. Now, as far as the other part of this, I do hate it for Hendon Hooker, who obviously late in this game, once the outcome was already determined, Hooker tore his ACL. And I hate that for him because while ultimately I don't believe that Tennessee's style of play this year is a recipe for a national championship, they were fun to watch. And Hooker himself was kind of the entertaining player at the center of all of this. So I think one of the things that makes it fun to be a Georgia fan is the level of competition you face on the way to the success you're having. And this year, Tennessee was a formidable foe for UGA. There's no denying that's the case. And the presence of Hooker is an example of that. When you think about what Hooker, this was a guy that, basically was not having the same level of success at Virginia Tech. When he first got to Tennessee, he didn't even win the job to begin the season last year. He's kind of proven over the course of getting a chance in games to show you that he can be this guy. So it's a really good story for the success that Hooker has found, and we think he's going to be a really good football player again. But for now, dealing with that ACL injury, so you hate that for him. By the way, speaking of Georgia rivals that are worth making fun of here, how about Florida losing to Vanderbilt? And I wish I had the video to show you of this. I don't. But the Vanderbilt fans storming the field after this game was like the funniest thing I've ever seen. Because ultimately, even from a Vanderbilt fan perspective, Florida's not that good. Vanderbilt has won a lot of SEC games, so they're happy to beat anybody. But it's not like Florida's that good. So you only had a smattering of Vanderbilt students and fans even at the stadium anyway. And so when the game was over with, they're just sort of like casually walking down to the field. And if you saw the overhead shot of their like storming the field celebration, it was like about a third of the way full. It almost looked like the high school game where like the parents and the cheerleaders and stuff like that all go on the field to kind of like hang out with the players once the game is over with. That's sort of what it looked like. It's like it wasn't a full-on, full field of fans. They still got fined by the SEC for it. But it's not like it's some crazy celebration because, frankly, even for Vanderbilt, Florida's not that much worth celebrating here. But for Billy Napier, you're left to wonder, gosh, what does that mean about his future here in terms of moving into year 2 with a whole bunch of momentum? And like if you go to the Florida message boards, like one of the things you see a lot is, Kirby Smart, he lost to Vanderbilt in his first season too. And that is true. I mean, it is true. Like just losing to Vanderbilt alone is not proof that you're not going to be successful eventually. Obviously, for the folks who kind of remembered those struggles of 2016, the thing that allowed Georgia fans to kind of push beyond that and turn the page and expecting better results was the success of the 2017 recruiting class. That was the real first major breakthrough for Kirby at Georgia. They were number 3 in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports composite in the 2017 class. It was the best recruiting class I believe that Georgia had ever had up to that point. Kirby's obviously had many since then that were better than that, but at the time, I believe that was the best class that Georgia had ever had. And pretty quickly, that allowed a lot of Georgia fans to forget what happened in 2016. But the follow-up to that was Georgia also started winning games on the field. And here's what I'm here to tell you, is that in this current SEC, getting wins on the field is just not that easy. It's just not that easy because Shane Beamer is showing signs of life at South Carolina. At least for a couple more years here, we've got an SEC East that Florida's going to play in. And Beamer shows some signs of life. Florida beat him this year, but Beamer turned around and beat Tennessee. One way or another, Tennessee's going to be a good team again next year. Not a playoff team, probably, at least based on where they're currently constructed, but a tough team to beat on a week-in, week-out basis. That's who Florida's competing with. Look at Kentucky. Kentucky beat Florida this year. Kentucky's a tough team. They weren't very good this year, but they're still tough to beat on a weekly basis. So Florida's going to have some of the same kind of recruiting success, not a top 3 class, but they're going to have some recruiting wins for this cycle. They've taken Rashada back to quarterback from Miami. They're in play for a pretty big running back that just decommitted from Ohio State. They're going to have some recruiting wins. They got Cormani McClain They didn't get McClain. McClain went to Miami. Sorry, Florida. I thought he was supposed to go to Florida, but he didn't. But the point is that they've had they're going to have some recruiting wins. You're going to have some of that to sell your fans on, but you got to sell some wins on the field there as well. And the win against Utah Week 1 suddenly feels like a long time ago. So just something to consider there on that. Not a good day for Florida on the field. And then finally, there's this. So there's been some discussion because of Tennessee's loss and because of the fact that Alabama last week was still ranked 7th in the college football playoff rankings. Could Alabama as a 2-loss team still make the college football playoff? Could they become the first 2-loss team to make the college football playoff? And if you look at, say, ESPN's got its playoff predictor model, even I think we talked about this in the show a few days ago, that even throughout all of that, basically losing any chance to win the SEC West, Alabama's overall chances of making the playoff have never dropped below 15% on the playoff predictor model, that ESPN uses. I don't put much faith and stock into that. I really don't. Now, if you power rate the very best teams in college football, Bama is in the top 4. If you look at the teams in which Georgia would be favored by the least points against, the team that would be the narrowest underdog to Georgia's Ohio State, probably the next team on that list is probably Alabama. Georgia would probably only be about a 3-point favorite against Alabama. So clearly, from a power rating standpoint, Bama's one of the top 4 teams in the country. But you gotta say the results on field matter for something, and Bama losing twice has to count for something here. And I told you last week that when the playoff rankings came out and you saw where Clemson was, I told you I believe that the committee was showing you that it was reserving the right to still put a 1-loss ACC champion, Clemson, in the college football playoff. And now I feel like that's more true than ever. And I think that by USC winning, they're likely to move up here too. Now, they got some tough games coming up. Notre Dame and the Pac-12 title game. So it remains to be seen if USC will keep winning. But if they do keep winning, they're going to be in the college football playoff. And right now, TCU is also winning there as well. Their wins are coming in such a way that makes you wonder, are they really going to keep doing this? But yet, week after week, that's exactly what they do. Keep right on doing, including Baylor on Saturday. So here's what it comes down to for me, that a lot of these models, predictive models, give Bama a shot of making the playoff. But as I've told you, I don't put a lot of faith and stock in these predictive models when it comes to the college football playoff, because ultimately you're leading to something that's eventually a human decision. In other words, if you tell me the percentage chance that so-and-so makes the NFL playoffs, well, I'll listen to those kinds of things because that's solely based on winning percentage. Games you win, games you lose, and I would say that there are some models that can tabulate your chances of winning and losing games here pretty effectively. But when it comes to earning the respect of the committee, a group of human beings in a room who make a decision, I don't understand how anybody could put a percentage chance on these humans in a room doing anything, because they've kind of shown you from year to year they just sort of do whatever they want. So to answer my own question here, I don't view Alabama as a viable playoff team. Maybe they get some chatter on Tuesday night because the committee likes creating, made-for-TV type drama. But to me, you've got at least 3 potential 1-loss or undefeated Power 5 conference champions, such as USC, such as TCU, such as Clemson, who I think would get consideration over Alabama, whether they're actually better than Alabama or not. And assuming that the Ohio State-Michigan game is close on Saturday, I believe the loser of that game would only be a 1-loss team. I would think they would also get more consideration than 2-loss Alabama there as well. So we'll see if this chatter actually erupts even more. But for me, for now, I have to assume that Alabama is going to remain on the outside looking in and will make that cruise and run the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me also give a shout-out here to our friends at Peachtree Orthopedics. Listen, a lot of the folks who listen to our show on a regular basis, you're busy, you're active people. You like to play golf. You like to run marathons. You like to, do the things that make life worth living, right? But every now and then something goes wrong, and all of a sudden you can't play golf, or you can't play pickup basketball, or whatever it is that you like to do. Well, when you face one of those situations when you kind of been knocked out of doing the thing that you love, that's where I want you to step in and get to know our friends at Peachtree Orthopedics. They've been Atlanta's go-to orthopedic practice for 70 years. Leading physicians and specialists that can actually work on every single body part you might have, whether it be shoulder, back, knee, neck, whatever it might be. They've got you on all of that. And they've got a process specifically in place for you, where they're going to listen and understand your problem, explain the options that are available to you to kind of get you back to where you want to be, and then make a plan for your recovery that gets you back to enjoying that quality of life that you're all about there. And they can do it for a better outcome at a lower cost to you than anybody else. That's what our friends at Peachtree Orthopedics are all about. So to book an appointment on this, visit PeachtreeOrthopedics.com. PeachtreeOrthopedics.com. Make sure you check them out today. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. I also want to get back to the conversation we were having a little earlier as it relates to that fourth down decision for Georgia. Kirby Smart against Kentucky. He chooses to go for it. They're up 16-0. Doesn't get it. Kentucky marches down the field and scores. Some people kind of criticize that. I told you earlier that I didn't have a problem with Georgia going for it on fourth down, but I don't necessarily like the rushing play there in that short yardage situation. That's the part of this that I don't really like. However, before I tell you why, let you hear Kirby Smart in his own words about why he likes to run the ball down there in that spot, down near the goal line. This, once again, Kirby from Saturday.
I mean, to get 1 yard, we should be able to get 1 yard. I mean, you got to be able to get those. You know what I mean? We got 8-9 yards a lot of times. We rush for 300 or how much, 250. So getting one shouldn't be the end of the world, right? But we didn't in those situations. We got to do better at situational football, and we did.
So I've told you this before, that when you look at the red zone issues that Georgia's at times had this year, and certainly had a lot last year, that I do not believe you're going to run your way to glory down there near the goal line. I just don't. I think it's easier to stop the run in that situation because, the safeties don't have to worry about the ball being thrown over their head. They're more apt to want to creep towards the line of scrimmage. And somehow, when opposing defenses seem to think they know what Georgia's going to do, it becomes easier to stop that. Kirby Smart right there says, hey, we got to be able to get 1 yard. We run for 300-something yards in a game. We have great offensive line. We have great running backs. We got to be able to get 1 yard. And at first glance, it sort of seems like that's true. But for whatever reason, and I'm honestly not smart enough to tell you why this is. I'm not going to be X's and O's and be able to explain all this to you. I'm just simply here to tell you what has happened. For whatever reason, Georgia in these short yardage situations has almost never been as good as you probably think they would be, even though they've typically been a very good rushing football team overall and typically had a very high level of offensive line play. Let me give you a stat that sort of backs this up. So Football Outsiders is a website that kind of covers both college and pro football from kind of analytics standpoint, and they have one of the stats they track, which they call power success rate. This is what happens when you run the ball on 3rd or 4th and 2, so 3rd down, 4th down with 2 yards to go for a first down, or what happens when you run the ball near the goal line from that 2-yard line and in area. When you have these short yardage situations for 3rd and 4th down or down to the goal line when you're seeking a touchdown, how successful are you when it comes to running the football there? And this year, Georgia's converting those situations at a 70% clip. But 70% on that is actually good enough for just 58th best in the country. So as Kirby says, hey, we got to be able to get a yard, and yet for whatever reason, even though Georgia has an offensive line that's a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award, and Georgia has a history of being a very good rushing team, in a short yardage situation, Georgia's actually not really exceeding any better than 58th best in the country in converting those short yardage scenarios. And you may want to step up and say, well, that just proves that Stacey Searles is not getting it done compared to what previous Georgia offensive line coaches have been able to do. But here's where things kind of get weird. Now, in every year I'm about to go back through, we would all say that Georgia has at least had a very good running game. And in some of these years, they've had excellent rushing attack and excellent offensive lines there as well. And yet on these short yardage situations, they have not thrived. This is 3rd and 2, 4th and 2, or plays from the 2-yard and in from the goal line. Those short yardage running situations. I told you, just 58th best in the country this year, converting on those instances 70% of the time. Last year, in a national championship year, Georgia converted those short yardage rushing situations at just a 72.4% clip. That was 52nd best in the country. In the year in which they won the national championship, they still weren't dominating in those short yardage running situations. Now, it's also fair to point out that when there's 131 teams playing, FBS level football, or there were 130 last year, that you can tolerate being in kind of that upper third in a couple of instances here. You can tolerate being, 50 best, whatever, in a couple of instances. It's not necessarily horrendous to be 52nd best at something when there's so many different categories that you measure a football team by. But I'm pointing out here that while you think, Georgia ought to be able to line it up and get a yard anytime it wants to, well, historically speaking, they haven't really hardly done it much better than the top 50 in the country. In fact, go back to 2020 for a moment. Georgia was 72.7% on converting power success rate. Third and fourth down short running situations, goal line short running situations, just 47th best there. Now you say, well, when Sam Pittman was here, we got this done. When Pittman was here, you better believe we can line up and get 1 or 2 yards. Go back to Pittman's last year at Georgia. In 2019, Georgia converted 3rd and 2, 4th and 2 and in, or goal line 2-yard and in 75% of the time. That was good enough for just 41st best in the country in Pittman's last year of 29. So that's 4 years of evidence here. Georgia not being any better than 41st best at power rushing success in any of those years, and just 58th best right now, 52nd best in a national championship a year ago. Now, I don't necessarily know why that is. I'm just here to tell you what is. And when it comes to rushing the ball in short yardage situations, Georgia just somehow seemingly becomes a little easier to stop. The only thing I can presume is that the defense just knows what's coming. And for any defense, if they think they know what's coming, their chances of stopping that just get to be a little easier. You've heard this said in Major League Baseball, that even these pitchers who are throwing 100 miles an hour, if you're a major league level hitter, eventually you can time a freight train. In other words, if you know a fastball is coming, eventually you can, get the bat speed up to where it needs to be to make contact with it. Well, maybe these defenses are the same way. It's very hard to stop Georgia when you don't know what they're going to do, but if you know the rushing play is coming, well, you can just throw a bunch of folks at the line of scrimmage there and eventually just simply have more bodies than Georgia can block, and maybe that's at times what's happened here. So that's my only point here, is to say that it's not as simple, unfortunately, as hey, we got to be able to line up and get a yard. We got several years worth of data here that when it comes to trying to line up in a short yardage situation, Georgia becomes worse offensively than they are in other scenarios when the defense is not really quite so sure exactly what Georgia's going to do, especially over the course of the last couple of seasons. Now, when it comes to the actual Kentucky game in and of itself, it doesn't probably matter all that much. And as John Stinchcomb pointed out, you may have had reasons for wanting to go for it there in that spot that have nothing to do with that game in particular. You're maybe trying to sort of win over your locker room as you get ready for the upcoming college football playoff or the SEC championship. I think that's all fine and well. But my only point to bring up here is it's not as simple as say, well, you got to be able to line up and get a yard. We've got a lot of years worth of data here that sort of suggests that when it comes to a short yardage situation, Georgia actually hasn't been quite as successful as you think they might would have been. Hey, one more thing before we sign off here today. I told you about being at Marlowe's next Wednesday. That's going to be a great time. Can't wait for that. But also, this is that really fun time of year when Marlowe's has some great stuff going on for you. And we've kind of told you about this now for a good number of years. I just love this. I think it's such a great deal and such a great way for you to get something for yourself, but also get something for people in your life that you want to give some holiday gifts to. Well, how about this from our friends at Marlowe's? Back once again, when you buy a $50 Marlowe's Tavern gift card, you're going to get as a special thank you to you a bottle of Michelle Brut sparkling wine. We've told you this all throughout the years, and I think this is a really good giveaway. So it's a great add-on to go with the gift card purchase that you're making. And when you buy a $100 Marlowe's Tavern gift card, you get the Michelle Brut sparkling wine, but you also get a bonus $20 Marlowe's Tavern gift card there as well. So you can maybe keep that for yourself or give it to somebody else. But for $50, you get the Michelle Brut sparkling wine. When you buy the $100 gift card, you get the Michelle Brut sparkling wine plus a bonus $20 gift card there as well. So it's a wonderful way to take care of the people you have on your holiday shopping list. Not everybody's easy to buy for, but trust me when I tell you, everybody loves the great taste of the chef-inspired food, the delicious craft cocktails at a place like Marlowe's Tavern. So make sure you check them out today. You can find them online, marlowstavern.com for a lot more on that. marlowstavern.com for a lot more on that. So this is one of our longest shows yet. Didn't necessarily intend for it to turn out that way, but I guess that's where it is. Nonetheless, we're going to make it a little bit longer by giving you a good number of golden shoes here today there as well. And we've got so many good ones coming up here over the course of the next few days that we'll kind of run our way through and share with you. All of them really, really good here, including our buddy Mad Dog, who may have given you his best one ever here with his graphic here. Sweep the East. He's got go for 2 in 22. You've got the Lego figure there with the Georgia hat on, sweeping away the dust that is the SECs and the rest of the SEC there as well. Mad Dog saying it wasn't pretty, but the Dogs swept their division 2 years in a row. Hashtag on the East. Hashtag go for 2 in 22. Mad Dog, that is well done and well said. We certainly appreciate that. Also, our buddy Chris checking in, Go Dogs 8419. Jeff Centel and I going up to Lexington this week in the bitter cold. He says, this is how I imagine y'all traveling. and it's a scene from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with the late, great John Candy and Steve Martin, and that's about it, Chris. Yeah, that's about what we look like, and I guess that would make me the John Candy in that particular situation. Also, Simone Cartwell checks in to say, this is a great day to be shouting this out. He says, getting to work around the University of Georgia campus, and I saw Pella window and door truck right there. He says, one of DawgNation Daily's great sponsors. You better believe it is. We love seeing the Pella window and door trucks out there taking care of business and doing good stuff. Simone, thanks for sharing that with us. That's great to see, and we appreciate Pella window and door of Georgia's support of our program here today there as well. So, by the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators that we mentioned a little earlier, tough time for them against Vanderbilt on Saturday, and they've got even more tough times ahead, including back in Jacksonville, 341 days from now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Go for 2 and 22, everybody. We'll talk to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. We did not quite mean to make this show so long, but boy, it got to be long fast, didn't it? So Michael Carville says there was a lot going on. Yes, there was. There was indeed. And now the thing that's going on is your comments. So we'll dive in here. We'll get those, and we'll have some fun. And then we'll get ready to bounce out of here. We'll give you an update later on about our Thanksgiving schedule. So I will go ahead and give you a little bit of a preview of this. So we'll have a little bit of a different kind of schedule for Thanksgiving week. Everything will be obviously full go and normal for the SEC Championship. We do have some scheduled differences the week after the SEC Championship. And this is going to be true whether the Georgia wins or loses. We have a huge week of shows coming up, and obviously a big week of coverage leading into what we hope is a trip to the college football playoff, but it will be a little bit different the week after the SEC Championship, and I'll tell you more about that as we kind of get a little bit closer to that. All right, let's see what else. Yeah, so I told people that. Yeah, I told people that. So let's see what else. JJ says the winner of the Georgia Tech game should get a cup of Nerds candy, which is kind of funny, for sure. Paul Moon says, I didn't think that Kirby was a mistake after the 8-5 year, but I wasn't sure he was the answer. Not enough time at that point to know. Yeah, Paul, it's very easy to forget this. But if you lived through it, in 2016, there were not like universal believers across the board about what Kirby Smart was going to do at Georgia. There were a lot of media people who were trying to do are we sure Georgia, should have fired Mark Richt? And then when Richt was winning those games at Miami, listen, I love Coach Richt. I don't have a bad thing to say about him. But Richt was kind of used as a little bit of a weapon against Georgia. Richt's winning games in Miami. Kirby's not winning games at Georgia. There was a little bit of that became fuel for, let's laugh at Georgia kind of getting impatient with Richt, moving on to Kirby. Now Kirby's losing to Vanderbilt. Lost to Tennessee, lost to Florida, nearly lost to Nicholls State. I mean, it was not good vibes during the season. It changed a little bit with the Auburn game, and this is one of those moments like you kind of wonder, what if that didn't happen, how things might have been different. But, Georgia faced an Auburn team ranked in the top 10 and played them in Athens. It was one of those rare night games. Georgia got that win there that day. Crowd was amazing. There was clearly a buy-in factor for that. Won the bowl game against TCU, and then obviously went on the path towards putting together the number 3 recruiting class, the class of 2017. And I'll tell you this, I don't talk about my numbers a lot on the show. We're a business, so I'm always thinking about my numbers, and you just sort of have to. But, the last thing you care about are like the statistics related to my show. You just don't care about that. But I will tell you, the lowest viewed, watched, the lowest numbers I've ever had for DawgNation Daily were in that 2016 season. Whereas Georgia started losing games, people for a while had kind of checked out on Georgia football and certainly checked out on DawgNation Daily. And I was kind of one of those things when you're doing this for a living, you're like, ooh, these numbers aren't too good right now. This is troubling. And yet the strangest thing happened. When the season ended that year and we kind of got into off-season recruiting talk and things like that, numbers boom, started going right back up and, kind of right back to what at the time would have been kind of a normal number for us. It's like people had a very low tolerance for the product that was on the field in that kind of first year for Kirby Smart. But there was a good bit of belief in the direction he was taking the program overall, because as soon as the season was done and all of a sudden now it's totally about building for the future and what was really a a very instrumental class, kind of a bedrock foundational class in 2017, audience numbers started going back up very, very fast. And I'll always remember that, just kind of watching that play out, how interesting that it was. And obviously those 2017 signees that came to Georgia were a huge reason why. And those guys all made that decision without much of an on-field product to believe in. There wasn't a lot on the field that made them believe that Georgia was really going to be the best place for them, but they chose to do it nonetheless. And obviously their decision to come to Georgia became very good for UGA, and I believe that Georgia did right by them there as well. So that time will always be remembered very fondly for me as a very special time because you just saw a lot of people putting a lot of faith. I don't even know that it was faith in Kirby. I believe it was just faith in Georgia, and that Kirby's love for Georgia, everybody together could sort of find a way to figure this out. But there was a lot of faith, and I mean that in the literal definition sense, in the fact that people were making a choice to believe in something they didn't really have much evidence to prove. But they chose to believe nonetheless, and it all kind of came in place. And for Kirby at that time, there's also an element of luck here too. And I don't mean to just disparage the success that he enjoyed, but he was probably a little bit lucky in the fact that he was building up Georgia at a time in which nobody else in the SEC East was very good. And now if you're Billy Napier, if you're Josh Heupel, or if you're Shane Beamer, or any of these other coaches that want to kind of build their team into something, well, now you're doing it knowing that Georgia's got a multi-year head start on you. Or you're doing it knowing that other programs are kind of trying to do the same thing at the same time. And listen, just because you want to doesn't mean you get to. And so for all these coaches that are trying to like make their program into something, it's going to be really hard to do it, especially with a program like Georgia that's has already built up so much and done it with a coach like Kirby who is so young and really in a lot of ways just kind of getting started. So, I'm sure between all of these names that we mentioned, somebody's going to have some level of success. But boy, the idea that what seems promising might not show any fruits, results whatsoever, it's absolutely possible. Like, it is at least possible this is as good for Tennessee as it ever gets under Josh Heupel. That, the moment of almost being playoff good, maybe next year they're not even that good again. And then, maybe they have a hard time, maintaining or retaining, some of that success. It's at least possible. And for Billy Napier, who sort of thinks that, hey, I've worked my way up and now I'm kind of ready for this job and I'm going to take that next step where the other coaches are kind of taking that step in the past, it's easy to assume, of course, that's going to be true for you, but it doesn't always work out that way. It just doesn't. So it's going to be a very interesting offseason here around the SEC. Always good to see you, Mr. Smith in here, Darius Smith Sr. Always appreciate that. Rob D pointing out only 8 programs have won back-to-back national championships. We could be number 9. Boy, that's something to think about. Paul Moon says he set me off on a monologue. I guess so, Paul. I guess it's just kind of one of those days for me around here. I apologize for that. All right, let's get a couple more. Jack Marino says Tennessee actually thought they were a playoff lock. Yeah, there's been obviously a lot of delusional talk from Tennessee fans, and that's one of the reasons why Georgia fans have had such a good time with this is that, clearly there wasn't a proper appreciation for how difficult the task was. I don't think there's any denying that's true. Heath Williams says, what's our ranking within the SEC on those short yardage downs? So I don't have that. All I have is national in front of me, and they're not ranked. It's weird how Football Outsiders does this. It puts all the teams in alphabetical order, and then for the different categories, it puts their rank, but it doesn't have the ranks in numerical order. So I can't easily do that. I'm sure there are places who can because it's just, manipulating the data, but I don't actually have that. All I've got is the national rankings. But I'm right about this, right? Like, that's way lower than you think it would be, and it's been true now for at least 4 years. They were a little better than this in 2018 because that was the 2018 offensive line to this point in time is the best offensive line I believe that Georgia has had. I believe that's the best offensive line they've had. And their numbers were a little bit better in that regard. But, wouldn't you think Georgia would have, 2 years outside the top 50, all 4 years over the course of the last 4 years outside the top 40 when it comes to those short yardage success situations? You'd think that'd be better, right? That's a little bit surprising, right? All right, let's go DawgNation.com. Cam Hasty, yeah, this is kind of funny. So Kirby, I didn't play this audio for you just because we didn't have time to. But one of the things that Kirby kind of did on Saturday was like about the headset conversation, like what happens in the headset stays in the headset. That if you want to pay a lot more money, you can get access to those headsets. Well, listen, I think he said that, kind of like, I know he said that kind of tongue in cheek. But if you're like one of these TV networks, you're like, well, listen, if that's on the table, then how much money is it going to take here? Because you better believe they'd love to do that. And there is some precedent for this. If you go to a NASCAR race, like when we go to the NASCAR race, we always get the scanner, and you can listen to what the crew chief and the driver are saying back and forth to each other. And like 99% of the time, it's pretty boring. But every now and then, it's not. I know that the FS1 show kind of always does a compilation of the most interesting things that are said, or at least the made for TV ones, the ones that they feel like they can comfortably play. But they kind of do that. I mean, like knowing what's being said on headsets is a huge part of NASCAR culture. So if these broadcast partners, Fox, ESPN, CBS, if they thought they really could have access to those headsets, you better believe they'd be looking to pay for that. You better believe that'd be the case. And I mean, there's just no telling it. And listen, this is just kind of part of like being in, I'm sure they do scream back and forth at each other, yelling this and yelling that, and firing this guy and cursing this guy out, and then when the game's over, you just sort of forget it all and you kind of get back to what you're doing, because this is a pressure-packed situation. It's like if you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, I mean, you're locked in and focused, and in that particular situation, well, of course, you're doing this and screaming that and yelling. And in a normal situation, you wouldn't do that. Now, there's also like full-blown road rage. It's not a very good thing. But part of the reason why people scream and yell when they're driving and somebody cuts them off is because that's the most focused and intense you're ever going to be, because you're trying to keep from dying. Because on the highway, obviously, anybody could at any given moment. So you're focused, you're intense, you're trying to keep yourself from getting killed. Some car does something crazy. Well, of course, you're going to have some sort of wild knee-jerk reaction. Well, the football field's some version of that there as well. It's like everybody's intense. This is zero-sum game, millions of dollars at stake for the individuals who are part of it, for the programs themselves. Well, of course, everybody's high-strung and yelling this and, cursing this guy out. Of course that's going to happen. And in normal parts of life, that's not how people should behave, but this is not really a normal part of life. This is a more of a pressure-packed situation than the average person will ever find themselves in. So that's the case. Yeah, Randy Hall, didn't get a chance to see him on Friday there at Buford, but he says he's going to be at the event coming up next Wednesday. Well, Randy, I'm excited about that. That's good. Scott Harris calling for Sonny Dykes to win Coach of the Year. I got no problem with that. I mean, the TCU resume is actually really good. Nobody wants TCU in the playoff. I think that's pretty obvious because they're just not a big enough brand in the eyes of a lot of people. But in terms of keeping them out because their resume is not very good, if they go undefeated, I don't think you can do that. Aren't they like number one or something in like strength of record, which is sort of a made-up stat? But aren't they number one in that, I think? I mean, like their resume is really pretty good. Let's see what else. LA Dog checks in and say, I wonder if those short yardage stats include a minimum number of attempts. It says if your denominator is small, percentages can be higher. Conversely, a large number of attempts indicates early down success. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, either way, we're talking about something that's been true now over the course of 4 years. And we've all lived through this enough to know that Georgia has run the ball plenty on third and short. So, see, like what I wonder about LA Dog is, and like you can, like there are a lot of websites that have even more like granular statistical data than this. I don't have access to all of those, nor am I smart enough to kind of, like the one thing I'm not is a small details person. Like the people who do this kind of work, like charting these kinds of plays, this is the Lord's work. Like this is not easy work. Like for those of us who want to understand more about college football, the people who go there and just sort of like chart these plays over and over again, that is a thankless task. And yet for some of us, it kind of allows our understanding of the sport to grow. So I'm grateful for it, but I would never want to do it. The point though here, LA Dog, is that what I would like to see is I'd like to see 3rd and 2 taken out of, because 3rd and 2 and in is included on this. Whereas, like I'd like to see the goal line stuff separated and the 4th down stuff separated from the 3rd down rushing plays, because if it's 3rd and 2 from midfield, well, I've still got to be on guard for a pass. Like, I can't quite. So if I had to guess on a 3rd and 2, 4th and 2 goal line play from the 2-yard line and in, I'm guessing it's way easier to convert a 3rd and 2 than it is a goal line play, because if it's 3rd and 2 from midfield, I've still got to be on guard. They may try anything. Maybe they're more likely to run it, but the truth is the full playbook is in play here. Whereas if you really kind of zeroed into just the goal line stuff, that's where I have the issue. You've heard me say this before. Kirby Smart knows 10 times, not even 10 times, 10,000 times more about football than I do. I never pretend to be some sort of expert on par with the people like this that are actually making these decisions for a living. I just don't do that. But I am capable of tracking what has happened and pointing out results. And the results here just sort of tell you, you are not going to run your way to glory down near the goal line. You're just not going to. It's going to work sometimes, but as a consistent path towards success, it's not going to be all that reliable. This is where, really clever play designs, very accurate throws, the kinds of playmakers who can create open separation for themselves with the guy that they're being guarded by, that's where all of that comes into play a lot more, I believe. Stuart Wiggins says we have the offensive line to convert short yardage plays, just not showing unless we need to. Well, maybe that's the case, but I just gave you 4 years worth of data. And it's obviously not true that Georgia didn't want to convert that on Saturday. I mean, of course they wanted to. And so, here's where I think you have to fully process what happened on Saturday. If you say that Georgia kept a lot, if you have a really clever goal line play, why would you waste it against Kentucky when you could sort of show that against LSU or show that against somebody else? That may be true. You may be right about that. I don't necessarily care about the result in terms of, hey, you got to get that touchdown there. You didn't have to. You still won the game even without getting it. But they called this play in the hope that it would work, and it just didn't. So this is one of those things where you have to kind of process a lot at once here, is that it's probably wise not to showcase too much in a game like this, but they still wanted to convert the play. And the point is that these types of plays down near there just don't convert quite as frequently as they might think. Cam Hasty says it seems like the offensive line needs their manhood challenge before those plays. I know it seems like that's the case, but, let's go back and watch some of these moments, especially during the 2019 season. For me, the most frustrating year of Georgia football under Kirby Smart is by far and away 2019. 2020 in some respects, but that was frustration from the pandemic. That wasn't frustration related to Georgia on the field. But 2019, for me, was a very frustrating year. And listen, I'm a pro-Georgia guy. It is I love Georgia. I love the success they're enjoying. I have a little bit of a positive outlook on life to begin with. But for even a guy like me, 2019 was just really, really hard because this offense was really, really, really struggling at times. They're scoring about 21 points per game in SEC play. And they had 2 first-round offensive tackles. You had Solomon Kinley, who was a future, big-time NFL draft pick. And yet a lot of these short yardage situations, the kind which we were describing in the show a little earlier, there's only so much 5 can do to block 8. And I don't care how tough you are. And individually, I'll take any of those guys being tougher than anybody else. But you put them in a situation where all of a sudden now there's just more humanity there than they're going to be able to move. And that's, I think, what sort of happens, especially down near the goal line, where the back line becomes an extra defender. And I've told y'all this before, that, my appreciation for football has kind of evolved over the course of the last few years. And I do realize it's just harder to score in the red zone. It's less green grass. Every defender becomes more effective, more valuable because he's got less space he has to be responsible for covering. And it does become easier to stop running plays, I believe, down near the goal line because defenders just have less of a job to do. All of a sudden, they can be a lot more aware of what's happening in front of them because they don't have to worry quite so much about what's happening behind them. Randy Hall says, why no plays to Kyrus Jackson on Saturday? There weren't much plays of anybody in the passing game in particular, and a lot of that was the wind. Stetson did not have a good day. I don't mind telling you that Stetson Bennett did not have a good day on Saturday. I think a lot of quarterbacks would have struggled in that wind. Bennett may certainly in the one interception that was as bad an interception as you're going to see, and so I don't mind telling you that. So that's part of the issue why you don't get anybody involved, Karras or anybody else, is they just really couldn't throw the football. Now the positive spin on this is they maybe didn't need to throw the football. That's fine, but this was not going to be a big day throwing the football. It wasn't. Sherry Hudson Byra says, I think you've caught a cold. I feel bad for you being in awfully cold weather for 2 Saturdays in a row. You sound better today. Be well. I hope it doesn't sound too bad. I'm kind of cognizant of that. I know it's especially for those of you who listen like earbuds and things like that, my big loud voice, I'm sure probably gets a little grating after a while. So hopefully there's a little bit of a congestion thing going on with me, but hopefully it's not too annoying. Hopefully. Tyler Bontas was saying we imposed our will the entire game running the football. We just couldn't do it on short yardage. Yeah, that's kind of the point we made a little earlier, is that Georgia's clearly a good running team. They all kind of almost always have been. But even good running teams can be neutralized in some of these short yardage situations for whatever reason, because the defense just has a better handle on what they maybe think is coming there. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, and we did talk about this in the post-game show on Saturday. Podlesny was a very Georgia needed the 9 points that he gave them. 9 points kicking the win like that's not easy. And beginning drive of the game, Kentucky chose to go for it in a 4th down situation when they likely would have in other scenarios because it's windy. And it's not easy to make kicks in the wind. Their kicker also missed a field goal later on in the game, too. Podlesny was a very viable weapon on Saturday. You're right about that. Fred Gunn says he's always using those Power Beats Pro. Well, Fred, hopefully my voice sounds okay in your ears right now. Johnny Prescott says, my only regret technical snafu was unable to connect on comment via Zoom at the end of the game. Yeah, that's right. We're going to have Johnny on the show, and I guess he did have a little bit of a technical issue there. Well, listen, I hate that we missed you, but I'd love to have you the next time, and hope you enjoyed your trip there to Lexington. But to all of you who tune in to kind of talk to us as part of the DawgNation post-game show, I really, really appreciate that, Johnny. Next time, we'll see if we can make that happen. Michael Head said we must use the play action at least basically use play action more down near the goal line. I agree with that. Get Stetson on the move, throw it, run it. Now, if you want to say, well, not against Kentucky because Brian Kelly's going to be watching that film, that's fine. My issue here is not, why would you not run that play, a better play against Kentucky? I sort of understand that. And I think you might say the same thing of, maybe this was a day just to get the win and get out of there. I'm fine with that. But your overall point is kind of what's true here, is that if you want to make something happen down to the goal line, it's most likely to happen with the threat of a running quarterback, getting him on the move. Wide open touchdown for Brock Bowers last week, wide open touchdown for Darnell Washington last week. Those are the kinds of things that have got to be more of a factor for you down near the goal line. Those are the kinds of plays that are most likely to be successful. I do agree with you on that. Gerald Harmon says the weather was bad Saturday. It was windy and cold. Yeah, it was probably the coldest Georgia game I've ever been to that took place outside, I believe. Now, obviously, it was way colder in Indianapolis in the national championship. That game was indoors. This is probably the coldest game that I've been to that was taking place outside. Yeah, so good comment, Michael. I appreciate that. Also, Kent Holcomb and Lucy Bowers-Boykin talking about the possibility that Stetson might be injured. Yeah, I don't know about that. I just think on Saturday they decided that passing was going to create nothing but problems for them. If it was a successful play, then that becomes something they've put on film. The one deep throw that Bennett made was just a really bad throw. And listen, I think Stetson had a very good year. That was just a really bad throw. I'm not going to be dishonest, nor do I think any of you would want me to be. That was just a really bad throw. And it was probably a bad decision to throw it because you had kind of double coverage. The ball, to my eyes, got caught up in the wind. And I'm telling you, to my eyes, that thing kind of went from one hash mark to the other. It got up there in the wind and it just kind of moved. I was like, ooh, boy, that's rough. And so it's the direction. I don't know if it's north, south, east, or west, so I apologize. But there were two different directions in the stadium. And the direction in which you were, that Bennett's interception came in, that was the windiest side. The other side, for whatever reason, was not quite as windy, or it was more frequently with the wind at your back. But even that, you got to still kind of, even when you got the wind kind of blowing at your back, you still got to know how to play it a little bit because it was also swirling a little bit. But that interception that he threw was into the windier side of the field, more so than the other one. But gosh, that thing got up there. It was almost like a balloon. That thing got up there and just kind of moved. It was. I mean, I'm telling you, like from where I was sitting, like visually, you could see it. You could see it go here and then start. It almost like a golf shot. That thing just went like that. It was really wild. Lucy saying that Stetson Bennett's shoulder may be bothering him, whether it's affecting him while he's playing. I mean, we had Jake on the show the other day. I think we'll have Jake again tomorrow. And, like Jake's answer to this was that at this time of year, every quarterback's going to be a little bit banged up. Maybe that could be the case. But, we'd also been talking about, the sort of banged up shoulder for Bennett prior to the Tennessee game, and he had some very big throws there that day too. So, all right, let's get some final comments. We'll get ready to get out of here. Jeremy Little says, we were in control the whole game, and it's over. Like most years, the Kentucky game would be nothing but a dull memory. Well, I certainly agree with the last part of that. I mean, ultimately, I don't know that the Kentucky game is all that consequential one way or the other. I don't. But it just happens. That's what we're talking about today. That's why we're talking about it, Jeremy. But ultimately, and the fact that the game was going to be all that consequential is one of the things that going into it gave me a little bit of pause. I told you this last week that there was a little bit of a misalignment in terms of Georgia's current mission and current goals compared to everybody else's, where, if you're a Michigan, Ohio State, you've got a big game coming against, a hated rival and a huge opponent. Tennessee kind of knew it had to be very impressive in every game that it played. Teams like USC, TCU, Clemson know they have to keep winning to stay alive for the playoff. Georgia was the one team that sort of had a little bit of a less defined objective at the moment and kind of playing a game which for the most part didn't really matter all that much, but probably mattered more to Kentucky than it did to Georgia. And on top of that, it's going to be cold. Like all of this sort of added to, y'all heard me in my voice last week. I said this pretty clearly. Like I did not have a great vibe about going into this game. I did not. And for me, all it takes is, you win the game, you check the box, and you move on. But Georgia still didn't play all that well, and nor did it play as well as it wanted to. Even if Georgia itself would acknowledge that this is one of those games in which, hey, you're just going to win and move on, they still wanted to play better than they did on Saturday. And, like, the only time in my mind I kind of go from, this is, not that big of a deal to, ooh, is when something happens that kind of brings the opponent one score away from really changing everything. And that's what happened at the end of the first half against Mississippi State, and that's what kind of happened after the touchdown for Kentucky on Saturday. It's that moment when you kind of tighten it up a little bit, when you kind of lose game control a little bit. And had the third quarter gone differently, then that could have been a big battle last Saturday against Mississippi State. And had Georgia not kind of handled its business on the other side of that Kentucky touchdown, that game could have been a little bit different too. So in the midst of games in which Georgia sort of, for the most part, handled its business, there were those kind of moments in which enough adversity was created where the other side was sort of one play away from really making it into something. And to Georgia's credit, it never quite let it happen after that. All right, let's see what else. Jeremy Little says he agrees. It's hard to get guys fired up to play a team who lost to Vandy at home the week before. And I think Jeremy's right about that. Here's the other thing, too. It's just sort of hard to be consistent. Like that's the thing I keep coming back to is that when you see the teams that are falling flat on their face and when you see Georgia kind of straining to get a win like this, you're just left to conclude that the biggest challenge a talented team like Georgia faces is the long grind of the season. And that grind is going to be going through the college football playoff. Yeah, your level of motivation will be higher for the games that you're playing, but you're still trying to play and perform with very little margin for error when the ultimate goal is a national championship. Gabe, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. All right, last comments on DawgNation.com. Then we've got to end this marathon. Senior Dog 54 says it was a bad day to be an Orange, and you're right about that. Johnny Surf Dog says when Tennessee and Florida lose, that's always beautiful. I agree with that too. Richard D says Kenny McIntosh is still the most effective and dominant runner that Georgia has, but Kendall Milton showed some improvements in his running output. Just wish there could be some diving over the collapsing line a la Herschel Walker, Reggie Bush, and Walter Payton. Yeah, I do love that play. Is the old school 80s play. You don't see it as much anymore. Handoff, jump over the line of scrimmage. I did love that, Richard. That's great. That's really good. Cam Hasty says there's never a good day to wear orange. Can you imagine how Tennessee fans must feel about those ugly orange helmets now? I mean, can you imagine that, how they must feel about those things after they wore them in Columbia? They've worn them before, but worn them in Columbia and lost, giving up 60-something points. That's awful. Johnny Surfdog also pointing out the youth on the Georgia defense. Yeah, y'all, this defense, I mean, in a couple of years, man, or maybe even next year, it may be at an entirely different level. It's amazing what they have from a talent standpoint defensively. All right, we have got to go. Y'all check out the AJC online, ajc.com. You know, you get pretty in-depth tech coverage at the AJC all the time. So this is a good week to kind of keep up. Ken Zagrita and the whole team there doing a really good job. Our friend Sarah Spencer does some tech coverage there too. A great way to stay up to date on a lot that's going on there with Georgia and Georgia Tech on the Yellow Jacket side. So we can get some of that from the AJC. Plus, Falcons beat the Bears yesterday. World Cup is ongoing. I was actually watching some of Iran and England before I left here this morning. So Americans play today, 1 p.m.? Americans 1 p.m. today in group stage against Wales. So all that coverage online, ajc.com too. So make sure you check them out. Also, RS Andrews, online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. RS Andrews is the one you turn to for all of that. Y'all have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll talk to you then, everybody.